I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. I still remember the day Sarah and I moved into our little suburban house. It was on the outskirts of town, with a big backyard that she immediately envisioned filled with gardens, a fire pit, and a place for us to enjoy quiet weekends away from the world. We'd only been married a year, but I thought I'd struck gold. She was the perfect partner, I thought. We had similar dreams, a shared drive to succeed in our careers, and most importantly, I trusted her completely. Over the years, we built a life together, a life I thought was solid and unshakable. She was my confidant, my best friend. Her smiles and laughter were like the soundtrack to my life, filling our home with warmth. I worked long hours, but I knew it would pay off. We discussed vacations, retirement plans, even had arguments about the color scheme for our dream kitchen. But all of that seemed to slip out of focus as Sarah became more and more distant. It started subtly, a late night at work here, a business trip there. She'd always been committed to her job, but these trips became frequent, too frequent. At first, I brushed it off as a temporary thing, a busy season or a project that demanded her time. But then came the small shifts, the way she started keeping her phone close, how her laughter seemed quieter, almost secretive. She'd laugh at texts that she'd brush off as, just work stuff, but something about her tone made me uneasy. I told myself to stop overthinking it. We all have busy phases, right? I'd seen my friends go through similar rough patches with their partners, and most of them worked out just fine. So I let it go, tried to push that nagging feeling down, tried to be the understanding husband. But it wasn't just her laugh that changed. Sarah was different. She seemed distracted, almost like she was living in another world, a world that didn't include me. Conversations were shorter, her patience thinner. There was a strange emptiness, like a light had gone out in her. One night, while cleaning out the garage, I found a shoebox shoved in a corner, barely covered with dust. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but that day I was in one of those moods where I just wanted to clean everything. When I opened the box, I wasn't expecting anything significant, maybe old photos or birthday cards. Instead, I found notes. They were folded, frayed at the edges, with a name I didn't recognize, Eric. It felt like the room went silent as I read through the notes, each word sinking deeper into my skin. I can't wait to see you again, and I miss you already. They weren't just notes. They were love letters, written in hurried, cursive handwriting that wasn't mine. I read every word, my stomach turning with each line, my world shattering with every affectionate sign-off. It wasn't just a misunderstanding or an old friend's messages, it was betrayal. Each note was a confession of something I had feared but didn't want to believe. I don't remember how long I stood there, but by the time I finished, I felt numb. Sarah and I had been married for almost a decade. I thought we were solid, unbreakable. But these letters painted a different story, one I wasn't a part of, one I never wanted to be a part of. All of my suspicions, those nagging doubts, were staring me in the face, proving I hadn't just imagined it all. When I finally pulled myself out of that trance, I realized I couldn't just go in there and confront her, not yet. I didn't want to fly into an argument without the whole truth. I needed more than these notes. I needed to know if this was a one-time thing or if I'd been living a lie all these years. So I decided to wait and observe, to gather the facts piece by piece. In the days that followed, I started paying close attention to everything Sarah did. I noticed the way her eyes lit up whenever she glanced at her phone, how she was always texting with her back turned, the way she locked her screen the second she caught me glancing. It was all there, hidden in plain sight, but I had been too blind to see it before. I didn't let on that I knew. If she noticed anything different about me, she didn't say. Our conversations became even more strained, filled with empty words, silence stretching between us. The life we'd built, the laughter, the late-night conversations, they felt like distant memories, scenes from someone else's life. Each night, I would lie beside her, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she could betray me so completely, so easily. I tried to imagine how she must see me, wondering if I was just a fool in her eyes, a placeholder while she lived her secret life. Every time she left the house, I wondered if she was going to see him, if she was lying to my face every time she said she'd be back soon. Weeks passed, and I collected all the evidence I could. I kept track of her business trips, her late nights at the office, even the hours she'd disappear on weekends, claiming she was meeting up with friends. I checked her phone whenever I could, texts from Eric that she had left open by accident, voicemails I played back when she was asleep. I even called her office once, asking if they had sent her on any recent trips, only to find out that she had lied about several. I was no longer just her husband. I was a detective, piecing together a twisted puzzle, the person she never thought would question her. It felt wrong to be spying, but the betrayal had stripped me of any lingering guilt. Sarah had made this decision, she had shattered our life. I was just trying to make sense of the pieces. By the time I had everything, my anger had settled into something darker, cold, controlled. I knew it was time. I invited her out for dinner, choosing the place where we had celebrated our anniversary just the year before. She thought it was a romantic gesture, a chance to reconnect, and she dressed up, adding a little more makeup than usual, a touch of perfume I hadn't smelled on her in ages. We sat across from each other, and as I looked at her, I couldn't see the woman I'd fallen in love with. All I could see was a stranger, someone who had lied to me, betrayed me without a second thought. She laughed nervously, sensing something was wrong, and I couldn't help but notice the irony. She'd hid so much from me, yet now she was the one who seemed unsettled. When the waiter left our table after taking our order, I pulled out the folder from my jacket pocket and placed it in front of her. Sarah stared at the folder, her hands frozen, her eyes widening as if the folder itself might explode. I watched her, saying nothing, letting the silence do its work. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the restaurant as if looking for a lifeline, someone or something that could save her from what was coming. "What's this?" she asked, forcing a smile, her fingers lightly touching the edge of the folder, almost afraid to open it. "You tell me, Sarah," I replied, my voice calm but carrying the weight of the discovery. "Go on. Open it." Her hand trembled as she lifted the folder's cover, and the first thing she saw was a copy of one of the love notes from her shoebox. "I miss you already, Eric." She froze, her eyes darting from the page to my face. I watched as realization settled over her, a mixture of shock and dread washing through her expression. "I don't," she stammered, but the words seemed to die in her throat. "Keep going," I said, my tone firm but not raised. "You owe me that much." She continued flipping through the pages, each one another piece of her betrayal laid bare. Screenshots of texts I'd managed to capture, records of her supposed work trips, a log of her phone calls with him. Her fingers tightened on the folder as she went through each page, her face growing paler with every detail she read. "Jack," she began, her voice barely a whisper, a plea hidden somewhere in her words. This isn't what it looks like." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh. Then please, Sarah, tell me what it is." She struggled to form a sentence, looking like she was scrambling for any possible excuse, any explanation that could somehow make this all go away. But there was nothing she could say that would change the truth, no words that would erase the betrayal written on every page of that folder. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her, almost. "Jack, please," she finally managed, her voice breaking. "It's not serious, it's just," she stopped, her words hanging in the air, hollow and inadequate. "Not serious?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "Sarah, do you have any idea what it was like, piecing this all together? Do you even know what you've done?" She looked away, guilt shadowing her eyes. I never meant to hurt you." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Did you think I'd never find out? That you could keep this from me forever?" I could feel the anger boiling under the surface, threatening to break free. But I stayed calm, every word precise, every question measured. "Jack, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her hand reaching out across the table, but I pulled mine away before she could touch me. The gesture seemed to break her, and I saw her shoulders slump as she realized just how serious I was. "Sorry. That's all you have to say? After everything?" I shook my head, the bitterness finally spilling out. "Tell me, Sarah, was it worth it? Was he worth it?" She looked down, her silence giving me the answer I'd expected but didn't want to hear. Part of me wanted her to fight for us, to say something that could salvage the wreckage of our marriage. But as she sat there, unable to meet my gaze, I knew that she had already chosen her path long ago. I was simply the last to know. After a moment, she looked up, her face a mixture of shame and defiance. "It's not like that, Jack," she said, her voice stronger now, almost defensive. I was lonely. You were always working, and I felt invisible." "Invisible?" I repeated, my tone incredulous. "So, because you felt lonely, you decided to throw away everything we built together? To lie to me, to sneak around behind my back?" "It wasn't like that," she insisted, her voice rising, drawing the attention of a few nearby tables. She glanced around, lowering her tone. "I didn't plan this. It just happened." "Just happened," I said, my voice heavy with sarcasm. "I wonder how many lies it takes before something just happens, Sarah. How many times did you have to tell yourself it wasn't serious? That it didn't matter? Was it every time you left to meet him? Or every time you came home and lied to my face?" Tears began to well up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. I watched as her composure started to crack, her face betraying the guilt she'd been trying to hide. "Jack, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I love you. I never wanted this to happen. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. "Sarah, a mistake is something you do once. This was a choice. Over and over again, you chose him." She lowered her head, the tears spilling over as she clutched the folder to her chest, as if hiding it would somehow make it all go away. For a long moment, we sat there in silence, the weight of the truth pressing down on both of us. The restaurant felt colder, the warmth of our memories extinguished, replaced by a chilling emptiness. Finally, she looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "What now, Jack? What do you want me to do?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was the moment I had dreaded and anticipated, the moment where I would lay out what the future held. I could feel the anger simmering beneath my words, but there was no satisfaction in it, just a hollow ache where love used to be. "I want you to be honest with me, Sarah. For once, tell me the truth. Are you in love with him?" She hesitated, her silence louder than any answer she could have given. Her eyes dropped, and that was all I needed to know. I felt something inside me snap, a final thread that had been holding me to her. Whatever love I had clung to, whatever hope I had held on to that we could salvage this, was gone. She had chosen him, whether she would admit it or not, and that choice had shattered everything we once were. "Jack," she whispered, reaching for my hand again, but I pulled back, standing up and slipping my jacket on. "We're done, Sarah," I said, my voice devoid of emotion, as if I were reading a script, a performance I'd been rehearsing in my mind for weeks. "Pack your things. I want you out of the house by the end of the week." She looked up, horror dawning on her face. "No. Jack, please. Don't do this. I'll do anything. We can go to counseling. We can try to fix this." I shook my head, feeling the finality of my words. "You should have thought about that before. Before you decided he was worth more than us." I didn't wait for her reply. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving her sitting there alone, clutching the folder that held the pieces of her betrayal. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, a strange sense of freedom mixed with a hollow ache. Everything I'd built, everything I'd believed in, was gone. But at least now, I was free. As I walked to my car, I let out a long breath, the tension of the past few weeks finally loosening its grip on me. I thought back to all the nights I'd spent wondering, doubting, questioning if I was being paranoid. But now I knew. I had the answers, and as painful as they were, they had set me free. I drove home in silence, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. My marriage was over, shattered by a woman I'd trusted with everything. But somehow, amidst the pain and betrayal, there was a sense of relief. I had confronted her. I had taken back control of my life. I no longer had to wonder or live in doubt. The truth, as devastating as it was, had given me clarity. That night, as I lay in our bed alone, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about what came next. The house would feel empty without her, but perhaps that was better than filling it with lies. I had a long road ahead, but at least it was my road now, my path to rebuild a life without the weight of betrayal dragging me down. Tomorrow, I would start over. And I would start with something she could never take away, my own strength, my own resolve to leave this behind and begin again. The first few days after our confrontation felt like I was living in a fog. Each morning, I'd wake up expecting to hear Sarah in the kitchen or see her leaning against the counter, sipping her coffee like she had done for years. But the silence was deafening. The house felt colder, emptier, like the life had been drained out of it. I thought I'd be relieved, and on some level, I was. But the loneliness was there, a quiet ache that I couldn't ignore. True to my word, I gave her until the end of the week to move out. She spent those days packing her things, quietly moving through the house while I tried my best to avoid her. I'd come home late, timing my arrival so that I wouldn't have to see her, wouldn't have to face the remnants of what we once had. I wanted to remember her as she was before all this, a companion, someone I had trusted and loved deeply. But every time I caught a glimpse of her moving boxes, each one a reminder of the betrayal, I felt that vision slipping away. She left on a Thursday afternoon. I came home from work to find her car gone, the key she'd always kept on the hook by the door missing. There was a hollow feeling in my chest, a strange emptiness that was harder to shake than I'd expected. I stood in the entryway, looking around the house that now felt both mine and alien. Her perfume lingered faintly in the air, a cruel reminder of her presence even after she had gone. That evening, I poured myself a drink and sat in the living room, staring at the blank walls and bare shelves where her photos had once been. I had removed all of them, each photo a painful reminder of the life we had built and the betrayal that had torn it apart. I knew I needed to let go of the past, but the weight of it settled heavily on my shoulders. It was one thing to kick her out, to close the door on that chapter of my life, but moving on felt like a mountain I wasn't yet ready to climb. Days turned into weeks, and I settled into a routine. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects, staying late at the office, taking on extra tasks just to keep my mind occupied. My colleagues noticed, of course. They'd give me knowing looks, a pat on the shoulder here and there, but nobody asked questions. I think they all assumed I was just a workaholic, too driven to care about anything outside of my career. If only they knew the truth. Outside of work, I started running again, picking up a habit I had long abandoned. Every morning, I'd lace up my shoes and hit the pavement, letting the steady rhythm of my steps drown out the noise in my head. It was my way of reclaiming some control, of feeling like I was moving forward, even if only a little bit each day. But it wasn't enough. No matter how much I tried to fill my time, there was a gnawing emptiness that I couldn't escape. Memories of Sarah crept in at odd moments, catching me off guard. I'd be making coffee and suddenly think of how she liked hers, 2 sugars and a splash of cream, or I'd be folding laundry and find one of her old shirts mixed in with mine. It was these small, unexpected reminders that hurt the most, like tiny needles pricking at a wound that hadn't yet healed. One night, a few months after she'd left, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring at my phone. I had deleted her number, blocked her on social media, done everything I could to keep her out of my life. But I was tempted. Part of me wanted to call, to hear her voice, to demand answers I knew would only bring more pain. I wanted to ask her why she had done this, why she had chosen him over us. But I knew it was a futile desire, a wound that would only deepen if I let her back in. Instead, I reached out to old friends, people I hadn't seen in years. At first, it felt strange, like I was reaching into the past for comfort. But as we reconnected, I realized how much I had missed having people around me. We started meeting up on weekends, going out for drinks, playing cards, even taking weekend trips out of town. They didn't ask about Sarah, and I didn't offer any explanations. They knew me, the real me, and they gave me the space I needed to heal without judgment or pity. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again. The laughter came back, the easy camaraderie that I had lost in the haze of my marriage. My friends reminded me of who I was before Sarah, before the betrayal, and they helped me see that life went on. The weight began to lift, the anger and pain gradually replaced by a quiet acceptance. I could still feel the scars, the jagged edges of what she had left behind, but they no longer defined me. Then one evening, as I was leaving work, I saw her. Sarah was standing across the street, her eyes scanning the building as if she were waiting for someone. For a moment, my heart stopped, an old instinct to approach her, to reach out, flaring up before I pushed it down. She looked different, more worn, her shoulders slouched as if carrying some invisible burden. I almost felt sorry for her. She spotted me and her face brightened, but I held up a hand, signaling for her to stay where she was. The distance between us felt like a protective barrier, one I wasn't ready to break. "Jack," she called, her voice carrying a pleading note. "Please, just a moment." I took a deep breath, my resolve firm. "What do you want, Sarah?" Her face fell, and she looked down, wringing her hands nervously. I just wanted to see you. To talk. I know I have no right, but I miss you." The words felt empty, hollow, and I felt nothing in return. I had spent too many nights alone, too many hours rebuilding myself to let her back in. Whatever regret she felt, it was too little, too late. "I don't think there's anything left to say," I replied, my voice steady, devoid of the anger that had once consumed me. "You made your choice, Sarah. We're done." She opened her mouth as if to argue, but then she closed it, her shoulders slumping as she nodded. There was a sadness in her eyes, a flicker of the woman I had once loved, but I knew better than to fall for it. Whatever life she had now, it was a result of her choices, choices that had left me broken but stronger in the end. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there on the sidewalk, watching as I disappeared into the crowd. It was the last time I ever saw her, a final farewell that carried no words, only the quiet strength of moving forward. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a strange sense of peace. The past was behind me, a closed chapter, and for the first time, I felt ready to look ahead. The months that followed my final encounter with Sarah felt like a new beginning. I thought I had finally shed the weight of our broken marriage. The anger and betrayal had faded, leaving a strange emptiness that felt oddly comforting. I was healing, and my life was finally taking on a new shape without her shadow looming over it. Friends had returned, laughter filled my evenings, and I was beginning to think of the future with something resembling hope. But life, I was soon reminded, has a way of throwing unexpected punches, even when you think you've already taken the worst it has to offer. It was a gray November morning when I received a letter in the mail, with no return address and my name printed in careful handwriting that I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper and the hospital logo at the top. My heart skipped a beat as I read the brief note. "Dear Jack. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I am writing because I need to say goodbye. I'm sick, Jack. Very sick. The doctors say it's only a matter of time, and there's no one else I want to reach out to but you. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to see you. Just one last time. I am so sorry for everything. Sarah. My first instinct was disbelief, a bitterness bubbling up inside me, thinking this might be some twisted attempt to get me back into her life. But as I read the letter again, something felt sincere, the words lacking the usual polished eloquence she once used to excuse her actions. After hours of pacing and replaying every bitter thought that came to mind, I picked up the phone and called the number on the hospital logo. The nurse's voice was soft as she confirmed Sarah's condition. Terminal. They'd found it late, she explained, a rare form of lymphoma that had spread aggressively. There wasn't much they could do now, only try to keep her comfortable. The words rang hollow, and I struggled to breathe, caught between disbelief and the ache of a love that still lingered somewhere, hidden under layers of resentment. I wrestled with the decision for days. Part of me wanted to ignore the letter, to let her deal with her own pain, just as I had dealt with mine. But at night, when the world was quiet, her words haunted me. I had once loved her deeply. And, despite the betrayal, a small, painful part of me still did. In the end, I went, telling myself it was the last thing I'd ever do for her. Perhaps I needed closure just as much as she did. The hospital room was quiet, save for the faint hum of machines and the rhythmic beeping of her heart monitor. Sarah looked small and fragile in the bed, her once vibrant face now pale and gaunt. She looked up as I entered, her eyes widening with something I couldn't quite place, gratitude, perhaps, or relief. A faint smile crept onto her face, but it quickly faded, her gaze dropping to the blanket as if she were ashamed to look at me. Jack, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You came. I stood by the doorway, unsure if I could bring myself to sit down. Seeing her like this, frail and vulnerable, stirred emotions I thought I had buried. I nodded, my words caught in my throat. For a few moments, we sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words filling the room. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to reach far beyond her illness. I wanted to apologize, Jack. For everything. I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo. I was selfish, reckless. And I lost you because of it. Her words, though painful, felt genuine, each one hitting a part of me I had tried to lock away. I had imagined this conversation 1,000 times, rehearsed every bitter retort, every word of anger I had saved up. But now, standing here, all I felt was a hollow ache. What do you want me to say, Sarah? I asked, my voice strained. That it's okay. That I forgive you. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. I don't deserve forgiveness. I know that. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the anger that had once fueled me was gone, leaving only an empty sadness in its place. Why did you do it, Sarah? I asked, my voice cracking. Why throw it all away? She hesitated, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as if searching for an answer she could barely comprehend herself. I don't know, she whispered. I was afraid. Afraid of feeling trapped, of losing myself. I thought I could have it all. I was wrong. Her honesty hit me harder than any excuse she could have given. She was lost, just as I had been, clinging to something she didn't even understand. And now, as she lay here, with her life slipping away, the weight of her choices bore down on both of us. We sat in silence again, the sound of the monitor a quiet reminder of time ticking away. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes filled with a quiet desperation. Will you stay? She asked, her voice breaking. Just for a little while. I wanted to say no, to walk out and leave her to face the consequences of her actions. But as I looked at her, so small and vulnerable, the anger faded, replaced by a strange compassion I hadn't felt in a long time. Without a word, I pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down. Over the next few weeks, I visited her often, a ritual that began with silent resentment but slowly turned into something else. Our conversations were quiet, almost healing, as we spoke of memories that once brought us joy, of the life we had shared before everything went wrong. I found myself remembering the good in her, the parts of her I had loved so deeply. She confessed her regrets, her fears, and for the first time, I saw her as human, not the woman who had betrayed me, but a person who had made mistakes, as I had. One evening, as the autumn sun set outside her window, she looked at me, her eyes filled with a sorrow that cut deep. "Jack, I want you to promise me something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is it?" I asked, my voice soft. "When I'm gone, please don't carry this pain with you. Let it go. Find happiness. Find someone who loves you the way you deserve. Don't let my mistakes haunt you." Her words struck something within me, and I nodded, unable to speak. She reached for my hand, her grip weak but steady, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of peace. A week later, she was gone. In the end, there was no grand goodbye, no dramatic farewell. She slipped away quietly, her breathing slowing until it stopped, leaving me alone in a room filled with memories and regrets. I held her hand as it grew cold, feeling the weight of her absence settle over me. The funeral was small, attended by a few family members and friends who remembered her with warmth, unaware of the betrayal that had marred our lives. I watched as they lowered her casket, a part of me breaking with the finality of it. She was gone, truly gone, and with her went the last remnants of the life we had shared. In the days that followed, I tried to return to normal life, to pick up the pieces and move on. But the weight of her absence lingered, a shadow that clung to me. I had promised her I would let go, that I would move forward, but some nights, as I lay in bed, the memories crept back in, and I felt the familiar ache of loss. Sarah's last request echoed in my mind, a reminder that life goes on, even in the wake of betrayal and heartache. I knew I would keep my promise, that someday I would find peace. But for now, I carried her memory with me, a bittersweet reminder of a love that was flawed, but once real. And in that quiet, lonely ache, I found a strange kind of solace.